Would love to. Would love to welcome all of you for joining us live as well as for the recording. Thanks so much to our presenting sponsors. You, of course, can see their logos on the screen. We have got just so many supporters, and we are so grateful. You know, we kind of thought of this idea of the nonprofit show, although it was called Corona Chronicles, kind of on a whim, not quite knowing what, you know, the life was going to be of this. And here we are, committed to 2021 with the partnership of these sponsors. So thank you so much for showing up and committing to the conversation on a national level as well. Julia Patrick joins me today, of course, as always, the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. And I serve alongside Julia as her co-host. I'm Jarrett Ransom, also known as the Nonprofit Nerd and CEO of the Raven Group. And today I am thrilled. We have just been chatting so much, and it seems like, Jennifer, we've known you already so long. It's just a comfortable conversation. So Jennifer Hudson joins us from Florida. Jennifer is the president of Think Beyond Public Relations. Welcome to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so very much. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, I love your website address, We Think Beyond. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, I need to connect with this woman, and we need to see what genius she has in there that we can extract, because this is one of the things that we don't do in the nonprofit sector. We're so used to being reactionary, and logically so.
Yeah, I mean, that's so great that you caught that with my website. My whole, ethos is around thinking of public relations in this through a broader lens. So I'm a strategic communications consultant. I work with emerging businesses and nonprofits to help them do just that, to think beyond PR as I'm all about like eliminating this PR equals media mindset, because the true practice of public relations is about relating to your various publics, right? And those publics could be your donors and funders. If you're a nonprofit, they could be your partners, your board members, news media, of course, your employees internally. I mean, investors, if government officials, clients, if you work in government affairs, your customers. And so, when you think about public relations, thinking about it through this broader lens, I think makes for more successful brands.
I love it. Well, today we want you to talk us through the 3 C's. I think this is amazing. And I'm so excited to hear your view on this, Jennifer, because this is kind of one of those things that we don't talk about in the nonprofit sector. In the for-profit sector, most all of us are, if not, we should be talking about the 3 C's. So get into that with us, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So I actually teach strategic communications planning to nonprofit communications leaders. And I have an online course for that, and then a messaging program that's like a train the trainer program. And within the community, I'll take a step back. Within strategic communications planning, there are 4 phases: research, planning, implementation, evaluation. In that first phase of research is where you're gathering the insights, where you're making sure and really validating that what you think you know, you actually know. And you have to do that by exploring your company, your customers, and your competitors. Your company, and I guess we're going to get into all of it later, but so it's a way to categorize the information that you need to gather to set the stage for planning. So how do I understand where my brand is positioned today, how we're communicating today, how we're viewed today, and how do I take that information and use it to like blow out my communications with a wonderful plan? To start any of that, you've got to start with data, with understanding where you are today. So that's the idea behind the 3 C's.
I love that word keeps coming up, Julia, data, right? Because I remember one of our first guests on, Sasha Lewis, really, showed up and she was like, data can be sexy. Like it's not something to be afraid of. It is something you want to invest your time in, and love that you've been that as well.
And and I'm not a data expert, but I play one on television. Like I love gathering insights. I love research.
Yes.
You got to start with something. And when
Right.
I've worked with nonprofits who may not have had the budget to do the kind of great quantitative and qualitative research that you need to do, where you're surveying and focus groups, I will often just do that work myself. Like, I've got to talk to somebody besides you to understand how you're truly viewed, how your brand is truly viewed, what your employees think about that brand. So I do that within the context of the 3 C's.
Good.
Okay, so then let's start off with that first C.
Yeah. So when you're looking at, the company means that you are taking an internal look at yourself. You are examining all of the ways that you communicate, and you are doing that through a few different ways. So if you communicate to your staff via emails, for example, maybe through departmental meetings, maybe you have some enterprise-wide or intranet, as we used to call it in the 90s. Maybe you've got maybe you communicate with your staff through text messages. You should also consider your board members and any close partners, I think, a part of that internal lens that you're doing. So what you want to do when you're examining company, you're looking internally and externally at how you are communicating. So you're doing really sort of audits of your communications, and you're thinking about things like, how are we positioning the brand to our staff? Are our staff connected to our mission? Are we communicating about our mission? Are we communicating about our business goals? And I use corporate terms intentionally with nonprofits because I think it's important to think about your nonprofit as a business. So asking questions like, how are we typically communicating our vision, our business goals, our day-to-day operational stuff? Asking staff really what they want to hear from you, asking staff if they feel connected to the brand, to the mission, and then looking for cues for that in your communications. So I think it's really important when you're examining internally and actually doing the same thing that I talked to you about externally, where you're asking questions of your external stakeholders, doing the same thing with your staff and doing that on a regular, consistent basis is very important. So that's the internal piece for company. And then the external piece is where you're looking at what you might typically assume are media coverage. If you have executives in your organization who speak regularly, looking at the content of those speaking engagements, looking at your website, blog posts, your social media posts. How are we communicating, and is that communication connected to where we say we want to be in the next 1 to 3 years? And hopefully you're doing some planning and you're thinking through that at your retreats, right? Your board retreats, and you're thinking through where we need to be in the next 1 to 3 years, and you're setting some measurable objectives to that. Because communications.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Jennifer,
I can go on and on. Just interrupt me.
You need a board retreat, because too often I've heard from people, especially during this last year of 2020, and I'm so glad to say last year, is that they've hit the pause button. They're not having a retreat. They're waiting to see what they need to do next. Or they just, like, oh no, I've never had a retreat. We meet every month, every other month, quarterly. So the fact that you said, and during your retreat, that is something that you definitely want to schedule and make happen. And I believe, and Jennifer, if you consult differently, I think this is an annual station, an annual retreat.
Definitely. And, as a former, I've served on boards, and as a board member, I think, when I'm on a board, I am all in. And so nothing drives me crazier than serving on a board where I am not being put to use, where my skills are not being utilized. I want to serve. And so nothing drives me crazier than participating in a board retreat where 3 to 6 months down the road, the actionable items that we said we were going to do, nothing happens. And so it's important. Communications planning also gives you, and this is what I teach to nonprofit communications leaders, you've got to adapt that plan anyway, that planning process any way you need to ensure that your plan is workable, that it's relevant and realistic for your organization. So if you can't do focus groups and survey research, talk to at least 5 people in each of your key stakeholder groups, have the conversations with them, right? Like, you've got to work within the context of what you are able to accomplish.
Now, if we
love
didn't
that-
learn that last year, I don't know what we did learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I love that let me just back up a little bit before we go to the next C, but I hear this a lot from nonprofits, like, oh, well, we're too small. We can't do that. And I
No.
love what you just said. It's like, if you talk to 5 people,
Yeah.
that's where you got to
Gather
start.
some kind of insights. Don't step in, because you can't step into planning. You can't say we want to get to here if you don't have a real good sense of how you're being perceived today, of how you're communicating today, where the gaps might be, where the opportunities lie, where the challenges are, what you might need to eliminate, right? Maybe in our social media posts, we don't need to be highlighting, the fact that it's donut day or whatever. Like maybe we need to be, our social
Or
media
maybe
posts
we do, who knows?
or maybe we do, right? Or maybe we do. If we can tell a story about our organization and how we're giving back
Right.
to the community and how we're serving our customers and talking about Donut Day, then talk about Donut Day. But
Right.
always
Oh,
connecting
love
it to that overall
That's great.
business direction, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the first C, which is company. And I love that. You have the internal focus, you have the external projection. What that looks like is a great place to start. The next thing you do is you focus on customers or clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the 3 C's, this is where we fail in the nonprofit sector. For some bizarre reason, a lot of times I think nonprofits, especially at the board level, we feel like, well, we're doing you a favor by XYZ. But the reality is we need to know not what we think, but
Mm-hmm.
what our clients need. And so talk to us about that.
Yeah, in this particular case, I think that I would describe a customer as a stakeholder. They're the
Okay.
clients that you serve,
Stakeholder.
donors and funders, partners as well, all of those stakeholders. And you've got to do the same type of thing that I was saying before. You've got to understand how they are perceiving your brand. There's one nonprofit that I did some work with. We were actually talking about doing a messaging session. And I was like, I've got to have some idea. And they didn't have very much media coverage. They didn't have a real good sense of, well, we did have a good sense that people didn't understand exactly what they did in the community, which is a death knell to a nonprofit. All of what they did. There was some brand confusion with another organization. And you've got to have some understanding. And so I was like, let me, I have this typical list of questions, 7 to 10 questions that you can create, and give me a list of your top stakeholders, the people who are most important to you, and let me speak to them. And so I interviewed those people asking those questions. What services do we offer that you believe are of most value to our community? What do you think we do really well? What do you think we need to do to improve? How do you typically get information from us? How can we improve the way we communicate with you? What's one thing we do that you believe is in our programs and services that we do really well, that is beloved by you? So you want to ask those types of questions to understand, do you really get who we are? And the wonderful thing about doing this is that you are also signaling to your target audiences, to your target customers, the work that you actually do, right? So are you aware that, if we provide X, Y, and Z services and the person that we're speaking to only knows about Y, well, then now we've told them about X, Z, and W, So it also, asking those kinds of questions is also a way for you to communicate what you do and to signal as well, which I find is a benefit that you don't often consider. You're signaling to those stakeholders that you're getting more serious about your brand and about the way that you're communicating, which is also a plus.
I love that you use that word. That's a great word. Great. Go ahead, Jared.
It is. No, I was just going to add, I think, and I'm sure you say this to your clients, Jennifer, is that this is work that needs to be done no matter how old your organization is, right? Because
especially if you're an older organization, you need to do it
because
you've got that embedded thinking.
That's right. And that's where I hear it's like, oh, think that all we do is, we're a soup kitchen, but we're so much more than providing food. We provide, a whole plethora of services, and they've been coined as the soup kitchen.
Right. And you're probably referring to other social service agencies. You're probably supporting people in ways that the community just doesn't know. And if you ask those questions, people, oh yeah, you're a soup kitchen. Well, did you know we actually do this, this, and this? It opens the door for that. And it's a signal to you, as I said, when you get ready to plan your communications, we need to begin telling these stories. And where do we need to tell those stories? And to whom do we need to tell those stories? So yeah, you're exactly right, Jared.
I love everything that you're saying, because you're preaching to the choir, and I love it. And I think what I'm so appreciative of, Jennifer, is that you're taking these pieces and applying them to our nonprofit sector in a way that is very achievable. It's very achievable. And sometimes we hear these strategies and it's like, oh my gosh, that's only for, a top tier organization. But I love what you're saying about this. Now I want to get into the more controversial and kind of tough piece of this, because this is the final C word, and it's jam-packed because it's competitors.
Yeah.
And
we're
afraid of this word in the nonprofit sector.
Well, I was telling you guys, I mentor with a few different organizations here in South Florida, and Radical Partners in Miami is one of them. It's an amazing organization. They work with nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs. They help them in areas of capacity building. They expose them to leadership opportunities that they may not have been aware of in the past. And there are usually smaller organizations that are burgeoning organizations. And have helped them grow into they just do amazing work. And Radical Partners likes to call them allies. And I have to say that, with my little corporate hat on, it's kind of snarky. Oh, no, they're competitors. You're competing with them for dollars. They're your competitors. But if you are the type of organization, we just talked about the soup kitchen, right?
Right.
The soup kitchen that is providing other services and referring services has a set of partners that they're working with. And in that sense, those are your allies, even if you might be competing for the same dollars. But for the purposes of communications planning and research, that competitor phase is where you are actually looking at the communications of those organizations that you admire. You're looking at those organizations with whom you do compete for those dollars. How are they communicating about themselves? What are they saying on their website? What are they saying on their social pages? If they do speaking engagements, what are they talking about? What are others in the community saying about them? And so you've got to gather that kind of information as well, not only because there might be insights gleaned from things that you can replicate, but also you want to know how to differentiate yourself. So as we know, there's tons of duplication in the nonprofit world.
Oh yes.
Sadly and perhaps beneficially, I don't know if that's fair to say, there might be a greater focus on collaboration among nonprofits as a result of 2020 and the pandemic. And I think that could be very powerful for those organizations that find a way to collaborate in real and authentic ways. But yeah, in that phase of your research, you are looking at what are people doing really well? How can I replicate that, or how can I differentiate my organization from what they're doing?
And that's something I say often, and I love that you said this too, is competitive benchmarking is something that you want to do, right? And I remembered in my master's program business, we were tasked to benchmark. We did a competitive benchmark, we did a generic benchmark, and it's really about, and competitive could be with, outside of your own geographic boundaries. As we talk about the nonprofit sector, there's 1.8 million nonprofits in the US, right? And so you do have competitors, and we are vying for the same dollars, whether it's Giving Tuesday or your state day or what have you, right? It's like, people have a finite amount of funding that they can give. So how are we communicating, our mission, our story, our case for support, and how are we
in a different way and differentiating ourselves,
Absolutely.
right?
And that competitive benchmarking is a big piece of that data collection.
Exactly. What are the best practices, right? What's being done really well from a communications perspective? How can we maximize that? So I'm all about helping nonprofits professionalize their communications. And I think the key and most pivotal way to do that is to add structure to your communications planning, which is what that 4-phase process allows you to do. It ensures that you close gaps. It ensures that you are asking the right questions. So yeah, so 3 C's is a part of that process.
So let me ask you this, in terms of like, I feel like your first 2 C's should be ongoing. I mean, it should be part of your culture. You're always trying to understand how you're being perceived and what you're doing. When you look at this competitive set, is this the sort of thing that you think you need to do a deep dive like every year, every 3 years, 5 years, or like, what's your sense of how this investigation should be occurring?
Yeah. So in the practice of public relations, we call this environmental scanning. And you should always, PR professionals have to always be in environmental scan mode, right? We have to keep our ear to the ground and constantly look at what's happening in the marketplace. I think it's very powerful as well to not only look at within our own industries, but look at what other industries are doing as well. I love, I heard Philip Hoffman, the founder of Priceline.com, say once that he spent time every day looking outside of his industry and studying what was happening in that industry, because it can inform and add insight and give you creative ideas within your own. But to answer your question, at the very least, you need to be doing that constantly, but a deep dive like this definitely needs to happen on an annual basis, I believe, with nonprofits. So communications planning, just like, you're doing your forward thinking and business planning at your board retreats, communications dovetails off of strategic business priorities. And so when you do that kind of thinking, your 1 to 3 year plan, your communications plan needs to be connected to that as well and done at the same time. So at least annually. But again, the communications folks for nonprofits should know that they should, and they do. It's like what we do as communicators. What we should be doing is constantly keeping our ear to the ground and understanding what's happening in the industries around us, in the nonprofit ethos.
Yes. And be willing to pivot when we need to, right?
Yes,
like if we have a structured plan of communication and we've been doing this environmental scan, we should be, and I'm going to use the word nimble, right? Hopefully we're nimble enough to be able to.
We're nimble as a result of the pandemic, don't you think? We
are. Yes.
Yeah, it has forced some creativity and pivoting that has astonished me. And it's been fascinating and heartwarming to see how people who have been able to make those changes and turn have done so effectively.
Absolutely. Some really creative, innovative approaches.
Yeah. One nonprofit I know started doing IG Lives. They're still doing them, drawing their community into the work that they're doing. There's some really creative things that are happening right now. So yeah.
Silver lining, right? That's what we like to call.
Yeah.
It is a silver lining. And I think as we end our time, because we're just about up.
Oh my gosh, it's almost over.
I know. It's crazy. We say this we say this every day to every single
one. You. Yes.
But I'm when I hear you speak, I'm like so energized and I'm so like right on. But this is not without risk. And you have to be brave when there are all these things coming at you to take that deep breath and that step back. And I'm wondering if you have some wisdom as we finish this up. Somebody who comes to their C-suite, and that could be at any point, to say, we need to do this. How do you get buy-in for that?
Yeah, that's such an awesome question. The way to get buy-in, I think the strongest case that you can make to gather the insights that you need to show the gaps and the opportunities. That's why it's so important to consistently be scanning the environment. Understanding where those gaps are and where they are, and then being bold. Like it's very, I hear this time and time again from communications professionals. They don't have the confidence to go to their senior leaders and say, this isn't working. But it is our, I believe that it is incumbent upon us, and it is really a requirement for this role that you be bold in because if we don't do it as communications leaders, who will? Right? We've got to work in concert with HR, with the marketers, with the program services people in nonprofits, product development in companies, with legal, with all of those different groups to be able to recognize when something isn't working and to be able to pivot. So, you know, it requires a healthy dose of confidence and boldness, and demonstrating your value to senior leaders as a communications professional lies in your ability to continuously keep your ear to the ground, understand how to connect these dots, right? So that, for example, when someone comes and wants to communicate something, you can make an informed decision about whether or not that's something that needs to be communicated, or whether you'd be better served focusing somewhere else. So I hope that helps, right? Just boldness, research. You know, a friend of mine, Al Como, he just wrote a book on change the management, but he talks about being the smartest person in the room, and communicators have to be the smartest person in the room.
Fabulous.
You know, he talked about his career at GE and other places, and how being the smartest person in the room gave you the respect of senior leaders to really, so that they won't even make important business decisions without having you there in the room. And that's where we have to be as communicators. And the way that we do that is by demonstrating our value, keeping our ear to the ground, understanding what's happening, making recommendations. So that's I know I'm probably going over with that answer. But
no, it's amazing. I'm going to witness to you. I'm coming back in my next life as Jennifer R. Hudson. Awesome. Because you're speaking my love language. I'm telling you, I love everything that you've said. It's really, especially as we start this new year, we have new things to talk about. This is a critical piece. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I've been joined by the nonprofit nerd herself, Miss Jarrett Ransom, CEO of the Raven Group. And here is Jennifer R. Hudson's information. You must visit her website. I don't care what field you work in within the nonprofit sector. And you know, we have 9 major divisions within our overall sector. There's something to be gleaned from on her website. Amazing stuff. What a great thinker. And I love the design. I mean, so I'm all over this. I'm like Jennifer's fangirl.
Thank you so much.
No,
Let me just say as well, you know, for folks who want to dive deeper and maybe consult with me, I'm perfectly happy to offer a 30-minute consultation. Say you heard me on the nonprofit show and we can chat about your unique communications challenges. I'm happy to do that as well. You can reach me via the website.
Very generous. Thank you, Jennifer.
Follow me on Instagram as well. I'm on Instagram, Think Beyond PR. Connect with me on LinkedIn. So thanks very much.
Yes,
oh my gosh.
thank you.
We're thrilled. Again, we want to thank our presenting sponsors. Without you, we would not have this dynamic conversation. I want to mention really briefly, the Boardable survey that we've been championing is ending this week. So go ahead and get on that, because this is a way for our sector to really understand what boards are doing. And we need this knowledge. We need this engagement. It's an amazing amount of research that's being done nationally. The founder of Boardable will come on and release his findings for the 3rd annual study with us on the Nonprofit Show first. Whoop, whoop. We're very excited about that. But in order to get that data, we really need for everyone to participate. So again, another fabulous episode, right, Jarrett?
Wonderful. Jennifer, this has just been, the time has gone really fast. It typically does, but what a robust conversation. Thanks for sharing your skill set and your expertise with us today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been amazing. And as we like to end every episode, we want to remind everybody to stay well so you can do well. We'll see you back here tomorrow.